They said comedy was dying the night Dean Martin's fist connected with Jerry Lewis's jaw. What they didn't know was that a friendship was dying too. Backstage at the Copacabana, July 20, the most successful comedy duo in entertainment history was about to implode in a shower of blood, broken teeth, and 20 years of buried resentment that had been festering like an infected wound beneath their polished public image. The crowd outside was still applauding. They had no idea that behind the velvet curtain, two men who had made them laugh for a decade were about to destroy each other. One would walk away. The other would spend the rest of his life wondering what went wrong. Picture this. It's 11:47 p.m. The final show of what everyone thought would be another triumphant Martin and Lewis engagement at the Copa. Dean is loosening his bow tie, exhausted from performing the same routines he'd done 1,000 times before. Jerry is still amped up from the performance, bouncing around the dressing room like a kid on Christmas morning, high on applause and adrenaline. But there's something different tonight. Something ugly brewing beneath the surface, like a storm gathering over calm water. You see, Dean Martin wasn't angry because Jerry had upstaged him. He wasn't angry because Jerry had changed the routine without telling him. Dean was angry because Jerry had done something unforgivable, something that would make any man see red. But to understand why Dean's hands were shaking with rage as he stared at his reflection in that dressing room mirror, we have to go back 3 hours earlier, back to when Jerry made the biggest mistake of his life. The day had started normally enough. Dean and Jerry arrived at the Copa around 6 p.m. for their final rehearsal. They'd been performing there for 2 weeks straight, every show sold out, every audience eating out of their hands. Martin and Lewis were untouchable. They were the kings of comedy, pulling in more money than any duo in show business history. Dean was his usual self, cool, detached, professional. He knew his lines, hit his marks, collected his paycheck. But Jerry was different. Jerry was hungry for more laughs, more attention, more everything. And that hunger was about to cost him the only real friend he'd ever had. At 7:15 p.m., Dean's wife Jan arrived backstage with their kids. Dean Paul, 5 years old with his father's dark eyes, and little Claudia, just 3 and still clutching a stuffed rabbit. This was supposed to be a family moment. A chance for Dean's children to see their father in his element, to understand why Daddy was gone so many nights. But Jerry saw it differently. Jerry saw it as an opportunity, another chance to be the center of attention, to steal a moment that wasn't his to take. Here's what happened next, and this is the part that no one talked about for 20 years. Jerry looked at those innocent children, looked at Dean's wife, and made a decision that would haunt him forever. He decided to make them part of his act. "Hey, Dean," Jerry said, that familiar nasal whine cutting through the pre-show buzz. "Why don't we bring the kids on stage tonight? Really give the audience something special?" Dean paused. He was adjusting his cufflinks, a ritual that helped him center himself before a performance. "No, Jer. They're too young. This isn't the place for them." But Jerry wasn't listening. Jerry never listened when he got an idea in his head. "Come on, partner. Think about it. The great Dean Martin, family man. The audience will eat it up. We'll make them cry." I said no. Dean's voice was flat, final. He'd used that tone before, and Jerry knew what it meant. But tonight was different. Tonight Jerry pushed. "You know what your problem is, Dean?" Jerry's voice was getting louder. Other people in the cramped backstage area were starting to notice. "You take yourself too seriously. You think you're some kind of artist instead of just another singer who got lucky." The room went quiet. Dean Martin's face went pale. Even the stagehands stopped what they were doing. You could hear a pin drop in the sudden silence. Dean slowly turned around. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "What did you say?" Jerry should have backed down. Anyone with half a brain would have seen the danger in Dean's eyes. But Jerry was on a roll, feeding off the attention, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. "You heard me, Pelly." Jerry's voice was getting more animated, more manic. "Without me, you're just another crooner in a tuxedo. I'm the talent in this partnership. I'm the one they come to see. You're just, what's the word? Oh yeah, you're just the straight man." What happened next occurred in slow motion. Dean's fist came up from somewhere around his knees. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't the flailing of an angry amateur. Dean Martin had boxed in his youth. Back in Steubenville, back when his name was Dino Crocetti, and he was just another Italian kid trying to make it out of the steel mills. The punch landed square on Jerry's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a melon. Jerry's head snapped back, his thick glasses flying off his face and shattering against the concrete wall in an explosion of plastic and glass. Blood immediately began pouring from his nose and mouth, dark drops spattering onto his once pristine white shirt like abstract art painted in violence. But Dean wasn't finished. 20 years of frustration, of being treated like a prop in Jerry's one-man show, of having his professionalism questioned by someone he'd carried to stardom. It all came pouring out. Jerry hit the floor hard. Dean was on top of him instantly, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tuxedo jacket torn. He grabbed Jerry by the shirt and lifted him halfway off the ground. "Let me explain something to you, you ungrateful piece of garbage," Dean hissed, his face inches from Jerry's bloody nose. "I've been carrying you for 10 years. 10 years of your stupid faces, your moronic voices, your amateur hour horsing around. You want to know what you are without me? You're a third-rate nightclub comic working the Catskills for $50 a week." Jerry was trying to speak, blood bubbling from his lips, but Dean wasn't done. The veneer of cool that had made him famous was completely gone. This was Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, and he was settling a score. "You think they come to see you?" Dean's voice was rising now, echoing off the concrete walls. "They come to see us. They come to see something that doesn't exist anymore. Something you destroyed tonight with your big mouth and your bigger ego." NBC cameras had been there all day, filming a behind-the-scenes documentary about Martin and Lewis. One cameraman, Tony Rossetti, kept his camera rolling as security guards finally pulled Dean off of Jerry. That footage has never been seen publicly, locked away in NBC's vault, but Tony described it years later to his son. "It was like watching a divorce," Tony said. "Not just a business partnership ending, but a marriage. These two men who had been like brothers were bleeding all over each other, and you could see in their eyes that they both knew it was over." Jerry struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His usually perfect hair was matted with sweat and gore. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. The manic energy was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Dean, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Dean was straightening his tie, his hands steady again, the cool mask sliding back into place. "You meant every word. The only thing you're sorry about is that everyone heard it." The COPA's manager, Jack Enriquez, had rushed backstage when he heard the commotion. A sold-out crowd was waiting for the most famous comedy duo in America, and one half of that duo was bleeding all over his dressing room. "Gentlemen, please." Jack was sweating through his expensive suit. "The show must go on. You have a room full of people who paid good money." "The show's over, Jack." Dean was already heading for the door. "Send them home." But Jerry grabbed his arm, desperation replacing the cockiness that had gotten him into this mess. "Dean, wait. We can work this out. It's just the pressure, you know. We've been working so hard and I get stupid when I'm tired." Dean looked down at Jerry's hand on his arm. For a moment, just a moment, you could see something flicker in his eyes. Maybe it was 20 years of friendship. Maybe it was remembering all the good times, all the laughs they'd shared when the cameras weren't rolling. Then Jerry opened his mouth again. "Look, pal," Jerry said, falling back into his familiar rhythm, trying to turn pain into humor the way he always did. "So I got a little carried away. So what? That's what makes me funny. That's what the people love about Jerry Lewis. I'm unpredictable." That's when Dean hit him again. Harder this time. Jerry went down like a sack of cement, his head bouncing off the floor with a sickening thud. When he looked up, 3 of his teeth were scattered on the concrete like broken dice. "Stay down," Dean said quietly. "If you get up again, I'll put you in the hospital." Jerry stayed down. Blood was pooling under his head, mixing with the dust and cigarette butts on the dressing room floor. He looked small suddenly, smaller than he'd ever looked, even in their routines where Dean played the sophisticated straight man to Jerry's childish antics. 20 years, Dean said, more to himself than to Jerry, his voice hollow with the weight of wasted time. 20 years of my life I gave to you. 20 years of playing second fiddle to a man-child who thinks funny faces are the height of comedy. 20 years of watching you steal scenes, change scripts, and treat everyone around you like they're part of your personal audience. Extras in the Jerry Lewis Show. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. When he turned back, his voice was different, sadder, more tired than angry. You know what the real tragedy is, Jerry? We were good together. We were better than good. We were something special. But you couldn't just be half of something great. You had to be all of something mediocre. That was the last thing Dean Martin ever said to Jerry Lewis as his partner. He walked out of the Copa that night and never looked back. The most successful comedy duo in entertainment history was over, killed by 3 sentences and 2 punches in a dingy dressing room while a sold-out crowd waited for laughs that would never come. But here's the part that haunts Jerry Lewis to this day, the part he's never talked about in 60 years of interviews. As Dean was walking away, as Jerry lay bleeding on that concrete floor, he whispered 3 words that Dean heard clearly. "Please don't go."
Dean stopped. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, he stopped. Jerry thought maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. Maybe 20 years of friendship meant something. Maybe the partnership could be saved.
Dean never turned around. He opened the door, walked out into the New York night, and became a solo performer. Jerry Lewis was left alone with his blood, his broken teeth, and the crushing realization that he'd destroyed the only thing that had ever made him truly happy. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within a week, every newspaper in America had the story. Martin and Lewis split, screamed the headlines in bold black ink that seemed to mock Jerry every time he passed a newsstand. But the official story was sanitized, corporate-approved fiction, creative differences, they called it. Mutual decision to pursue separate careers. The kind of polite lies that Hollywood tells when the truth is too ugly for public consumption. Nobody talked about the fight. Nobody mentioned the blood, or the broken teeth, or the way Jerry cried in that empty dressing room after everyone else had gone home. The partnership was simply, oh, Jerry would go on to make movies, direct films, host telethons. He'd win awards and make millions. But he'd never again capture the magic he'd had with Dean. And late at night, when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, he'd remember what it felt like to have the only person who truly understood him walk away forever. Dean became cooler than ever, a member of the Rat Pack, a movie star, a legend. But those closest to him noticed something different after that night at the Copa. A distance. A wall that hadn't been there before. He'd learned that the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest. Years later, when they met for the final time at Sammy Davis Jr.'s funeral, they barely spoke. 2 old men who had once been inseparable, reduced to polite nods and careful distance. The brotherhood was gone, killed in a moment of ego and pride that neither man could take back. So the next time someone tells you that comedy is all about timing, remember this story. Remember that the greatest comedy partnership in history ended not with a punchline, but with a real punch. And sometimes, when the laughter stops, all you're left with is silence and the sound of dreams breaking on a concrete floor. The king of cool and the king of comedy, destroyed by 3 words and 20 years of buried resentment. That's the real tragedy of Martin and Lewis. Not that they broke up, but that they broke up so badly that they never found their way back to each other. If you think this story was intense, wait until you hear about the time Dean Martin told Frank Sinatra exactly what he thought of his mob connections. Hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started on the untold stories of the Rat Pack. And leave a comment below, do you think Dean was right to walk away, or should he have forgiven Jerry? The answer might surprise you.